The morning began like every other in Apple Valley, quiet, golden, timeless. The first rays of sunlight stretched lazily over the hills, touching each tree in Daniel Whitaker's orchard with a warm glow that always made him pause, even after all these years. From the porch of the weathered farmhouse, Daniel sipped his black coffee and let the cool air sting his face. He loved this hour, before the world fully woke, before the sounds of traffic and distant construction intruded. Here, there was only the whisper of wind through the branches and the soft rustle of leaves shaking off the dew. The orchard had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had planted the first row after returning from the war, believing the valley soil to be the richest in the county. His father had expanded it, weathered blight and drought, and passed it to Daniel with calloused hands and quiet pride. This land wasn't just property. It was history. It was memory. And Daniel knew it like the lines of his own palm: every rise and dip in the terrain, every tree that produced the sweetest fruit, every fence post that had needed replacing last winter. That was why he noticed it first, a low, distant rumble that didn't belong to the valley's morning song. At first, he thought it was a heavy truck on the county road. Then the rumble multiplied: 2, 3, half a dozen engines. The sound grew louder until it was a growl that set his teeth on edge. He set his mug down slowly and walked to the edge of the porch, scanning the tree line. Dust rose on the horizon. Within minutes, a convoy rolled into view: bulldozers, dump trucks, flatbeds loaded with equipment. At the head of it all was a spotless white SUV that gleamed in the early sun like a knife blade. Daniel's stomach sank. He already knew who it was. The SUV pulled up in front of his gate. Out stepped Karen Blake, Oak Ridge HOA president, self-appointed queen of everything within 5 square miles. She was perfectly put together, as always, in a pressed white blouse and navy blazer that screamed corporate warrior. A clipboard was tucked under one arm, her designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Morning, Mr. Whitaker," she called brightly, as though they were neighbors meeting over coffee. Daniel didn't move. "What is this?" Karen's smile widened. "Progress," she said, sweeping an arm toward the bulldozers behind her. "We're finally moving forward with the Oak Ridge Resort project. Isn't it exciting? A luxury getaway right here in Apple Valley." His pulse spiked. "On my land?" Karen didn't even blink. "Well, technically, it's community property now. You know, per the redevelopment clause in the HOA charter." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "The orchard has been in my family for 80 years. You can't just..." "Oh, but we can," Karen interrupted, flipping through her clipboard with theatrical flair. "Here it is. Article 17, Redevelopment Authority. It gives the HOA full rights to repurpose underutilized land for community beneficial projects. And since apple farming hasn't exactly been profitable around here..." She trailed off with a shrug that made Daniel want to tear the paper from her hands. "You didn't even ask me," he said, his voice low now, dangerous. Karen's smile never wavered. "We had a vote. You missed the meeting." A bulldozer roared to life behind her, drowning out the morning birdsong. "No," Daniel said sharply. "Not happening. Shut it down." Karen raised her hand, and the bulldozer operator throttled forward. Daniel sprinted toward the machine, shouting, "Stop! Stop!" 2 private security guards stepped out from a black pickup and intercepted him before he could reach the cab. One held him back by the arm as the first bulldozer's blade met the trunk of an apple tree. The sound was deafening. Wood splintered, leaves exploded into the air, and the tree, a tree that had stood since before Daniel was born, toppled into the dirt with a crash that seemed to shake the earth itself. He struggled against the guard's grip. "You can't do this." Karen watched calmly from the roadside, her sunglasses now in place, reflecting the destruction like twin mirrors. "It's already done," she said over the engine noise. "You might as well go back inside and start packing. Construction crews will be here all month." Tree after tree fell. The air filled with dust and the sharp smell of torn wood. Daniel felt each crash like a blow to the chest, until the orchard, his orchard, was nothing but a skeleton of broken stumps and churned earth. When the machines finally went quiet, silence fell over the valley like a shroud. Karen closed her clipboard, satisfied. "You'll thank me one day," she said, walking back to her SUV. "This is going to put Apple Valley on the map." Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the ruin, the dust settling on his boots like ash. When the convoy rolled away and the valley was quiet again, he walked through the wreckage, running a hand over the shattered wood of what had once been his best-producing tree. The farm felt hollow. He crouched down, picked up a fallen apple, still green, bruised and dirty, and turned it over in his hand. The anger came then. Hot, steady, bone-deep. Karen thought she'd won. She thought she could bulldoze him the same way she bulldozed the orchard. But what she didn't know, what no one in that convoy knew, was that Daniel Whitaker wasn't just a farmer. He was the county zoning commissioner. The man whose signature was required before any of this land could be legally rezoned. And tonight, standing in the shadow of his family's destroyed legacy, he made himself a promise. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Daniel barely slept. He spent the night walking the ruined rows of the orchard with a lantern, like a ghost haunting his own land. Every crunch of his boots on the churned soil felt like an accusation. By sunrise, he'd made up his mind. He wasn't going to fight Karen Blake with fists or protests. He had something far sharper: the law. The county administration building was already buzzing when Daniel arrived later that morning. Phones rang, printers hummed, and the faint aroma of burnt coffee hung in the air. People greeted him with polite nods as he walked in. Everyone knew him here. He didn't go to his office. Not yet. Instead, he stopped at the records desk. "Everything you've got on the Oak Ridge HOA redevelopment plan," he told the clerk, his voice calm but clipped. The clerk, a young man who clearly sensed the storm brewing behind Daniel's eyes, swallowed and nodded. "Why, yes, sir." Within an hour, Daniel had a stack of documents on his desk: blueprints, permits, environmental assessments, budget projections. He shut his office door, rolled up his sleeves, and started reading. The deeper he dug, the angrier he became. The so-called environmental impact study was laughable: dated signatures, copied and pasted numbers, even photos of wildlife habitats from a completely different county. Noise ordinances? Ignored. Traffic studies? Falsified. And then he found it, the zoning approval form. Blank. His signature was supposed to be there. Without it, nothing Karen had done was legally binding. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the paper for a long moment. Then he smiled, the first real smile since yesterday morning. Karen Blake thought she'd steamrolled him. But she'd made a critical mistake. That afternoon, Daniel walked into the County Development Board meeting. The room was full: developers in suits, board members in their usual business casual, and a few reporters waiting for a story. Karen was already at the front of the room, standing beside a massive presentation board showing glossy renderings of what she called the Apple Valley Luxury Retreat. Pools, tennis courts, a spa. She was in her element, charming the investors, throwing out phrases like revenue growth and community revitalization. When she wrapped up, the board began its usual polite applause. That was when Daniel stood. "My name is Daniel Whitaker," he said, his voice carrying through the room like a crack of thunder. "Zoning Commissioner for Apple County. And I'm here to inform you that this project is illegal." The room went dead silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Karen's smile faltered, just slightly, before she quickly recovered. "Mr. Whitaker. What a surprise." She gave the room a breezy laugh. "Don't worry, folks. He's just a little upset we had to repurpose his land. It's understandable." Daniel walked to the front of the room, dropping the stack of documents onto the table with a heavy thud. "Repurpose? You mean bulldoze? Without approval? Without my signature?" He held up the blank zoning form so the entire room could see. "This project does not have final authorization," he said. "Which means every tree you cut down, every bulldozer you ran, every dollar you've spent, all of it violates county code." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's charm cracked. "You can't be serious," she said through gritted teeth. "I am," Daniel replied. Effective immediately, all construction is halted, pending a full investigation into the HOA's permits and environmental claims. The developers started whispering among themselves. Some looked furious, others worried. One man in a tailored gray suit stood and left without a word. Karen's face turned red as she stepped closer to Daniel, lowering her voice to a hiss. "You're making a huge mistake, Whitaker. This resort is going to put this county on the map. Do you really want to be the man who killed progress?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You destroyed my family's orchard." "That wasn't progress, that was greed." The board chair cleared her throat. Given this revelation, the development board votes to suspend the project until these allegations can be reviewed. Karen spun on the chairwoman. "You can't just shut us down like this." "Oh, yes they can," Daniel said, meeting her glare. "And I just did." He gathered the papers, nodded once to the board, and walked out. By the time he stepped into the cool afternoon air, Daniel's hands were shaking not with fear, but with the adrenaline of having struck back. For the first time since the bulldozers came, he felt like he could breathe. But the war wasn't over. He drove home, taking the long way through town, noting every business that depended on local farming, the cider mill, the produce market, the small bakery that used his apples every fall. He knew if Karen ever got this resort approved, they'd all be gone, replaced with gift shops and overpriced restaurants. When he pulled into the driveway that evening, a black SUV was already parked outside the farmhouse. Karen was leaning against it, arms crossed, still in her blazer but now wearing an expression that could cut glass. "This little stunt of yours cost us a fortune today," she said as he stepped out of his truck. "You cost me a legacy," Daniel replied evenly. Karen took a step closer. "I'm not going away, Whitaker. You can hide behind your zoning board for now, but this resort is happening. And when it does, you'll be nothing but the bitter old man who tried to stop it." Daniel didn't flinch. "You think this is about me?" He gestured toward the orchard ruins behind him. "This valley doesn't belong to you, Karen. And as long as I sit in that zoning office, you'll never pour a single ounce of concrete here." Karen's smile returned, this time sharp, predatory. "Then I guess this is war." "Then you'd better bring more than bulldozers," Daniel said, and turned his back on her, walking into the house. He shut the door, leaving Karen standing in the fading sunlight. From the kitchen window, he watched her climb into the SUV and drive away. And for the first time all day, Daniel allowed himself to hope. Because tomorrow, he wasn't just going to stop the project. He was going to bury it. 2 weeks later, Apple Valley was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Word of the halted resort project had spread beyond the county. Reporters camped out near the town square, asking farmers and shopkeepers how they felt about the battle between Daniel Whitaker and the Oak Ridge HOA. Editorials appeared in the local paper, some praising Daniel as a man standing up for tradition, others calling him a stubborn relic holding back progress. But Daniel didn't care what people called him. He cared about one thing: stopping Karen Blake's project before she found a way to revive it. And tonight, he was going to do just that. The county hall was packed for the public hearing, more crowded than Daniel had ever seen it. Farmers in worn boots stood shoulder to shoulder with business owners in aprons and clerks still in their work shirts. Investors and developers had flown in from out of state, tense and impatient. Cameras from 3 local news stations were set up at the back, red lights glowing. Karen Blake sat near the front, her posture perfect, a navy suit pressed so sharply it could cut glass. She was flanked by 2 lawyers and a pair of HOA board members who looked as though they hadn't slept in days. When Daniel walked in, the room quieted for just a second, long enough for every eye to turn toward him. He carried a wooden crate in his hands. Not paperwork, not blueprints, just the last bushel of apples salvaged from his orchard before the bulldozers turned it to dust. He placed it on the table in front of the board members and waited for the chairwoman to call the meeting to order. "This is the final hearing," the chairwoman said, her voice echoing across the room. "The county board will hear statements from both parties and then vote on whether the Oak Ridge Resort project will move forward or be denied permanently." Karen was called first. She stood, all smiles for the cameras, and launched into her speech. "This project represents growth," she said smoothly. "It will bring jobs, tourism, and revenue to a county that has been stagnant for years. Imagine a future where Apple Valley is a destination, not just a sleepy farm town." She clicked a remote, and glossy renderings filled the projector screen, images of sparkling pools, modern villas, manicured golf courses. The investors nodded approvingly. Karen glanced at Daniel as she wrapped up, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Mr. Whitaker can cling to the past all he wants," she said, "but we have to think about the future. And this resort is the future." She sat down, satisfied. The chairwoman turned to Daniel. "Commissioner Whitaker?" He stood slowly, his boots heavy on the wood floor, and faced the packed room. "I've heard a lot about the future these last few weeks," he began, his voice steady. "But before we talk about the future, I want to remind you about the past." He reached into the crate and held up an apple. "My grandfather planted the first row of trees on this land in 1947, he said, turning the apple in his hand. "Through droughts, floods, storms, he kept planting. My father took over and built it into a farm that fed this valley for decades. Families made their living here. Kids came in the fall to pick apples. Every harvest festival we had cider from this orchard on the table." He let the apple drop back into the crate. The thunk echoed in the silent hall. "And a month ago, without my approval, without legal authorization, without respect for the families who've worked this land, this HOA bulldozed it to the ground." He swept his gaze across the room, letting the weight of his words hang there. "This isn't about progress. This isn't about tourism or revenue. This is about whether a handful of people get to decide that history, heritage, and private property don't matter anymore." He stepped closer to the board table, placing his hands on the crate. "As zoning commissioner, it is my recommendation that this project be denied permanently." The room erupted. Farmers cheered. Reporters scribbled furiously. But Karen wasn't finished. She shot to her feet, her lawyers at her side. "You're ignoring the bigger picture," she snapped. "This project would have brought millions into this county. It would have lifted property values, funded schools, created jobs. And destroyed everything that made this valley worth living in," Daniel cut in. Karen's composure cracked. She turned to the board, her voice rising. "If you vote against this project, you're sentencing this county to die. Do you want that on your record? Do you want to explain to your children why they have to leave this valley to find a decent future?" The board chairwoman raised her hand. "Enough. The arguments have been heard. It's time to vote." One by one, the board members cast their votes. When the last one spoke, the chairwoman nodded. "The motion to approve the Oak Ridge Resort project has been denied," she said. "The vote is unanimous. The project is permanently blocked." For a moment, the room was silent. Then the farmers erupted into cheers, clapping, and stomping their boots. Karen just stood there, frozen. The color drained from her face as her lawyers whispered frantically, already talking about appeals. But it didn't matter, the vote was final. Daniel exhaled, feeling something inside him unclench. The board adjourned the meeting. People crowded around him, shaking his hand, thanking him, some even tearing up. But Daniel stayed quiet, letting the noise wash over him. When he finally stepped outside into the cool night air, the sky was streaked with purple and gold. He picked up one of the salvaged apples from the crate, bit into it, and let the sweet, crisp taste settle on his tongue. The orchard might be gone, but the valley would grow again. And this time, it would grow on his terms. As he walked back to his truck, he glanced once over his shoulder at the courthouse doors. Karen stood there, still in her perfect navy suit, watching him leave. For the first time since this started, she looked small. Daniel climbed into his truck, turned the key, and drove off into the night, the crate of apples on the seat beside him. Justice, he thought, was a lot like an apple. Best served fresh, and with a little bite.